In Britain, you have the Conservatives and you have Labour. You also have the Liberal Democrats. You have a smattering of small parties, like the Greens, for example, various others, like the SDP. But these parties really are pretty inconsequential. The main parties, Conservative and Labour, hoover up most of the support. And people have just felt for years that we've needed another party to come in who are not on the left like the Liberal Democrats, who either are on the right or straddle sort of the centre right. And a lot of people really pinned their hopes on reform when they rose from the ashes of UKIP. Nigel Farage was obviously involved with UKIP in the Brexit sort of vote, and then he sort of decided to come back into the political realm and throw his lot in with reform. And since then, reform have skyrocketed in the opinion polls. They've managed to get 5 MPs elected, one of which being Nigel Farage. You've got Richard Tice, the businessman. You've got a couple of other people, notably Lee Anderson, who was a defector. But mostly the focus has been on Nigel Farage, as everybody knows. Rupert Lowe, people might know from his time spent as chairman of Southampton Football Club, which I did. And he's become very popular. His opinions, he's a very straight shooter. He says a lot of what people on the right want to hear. And it seems like a lot of support has kind of gone his way. Not necessarily shifted from Nigel Farage, but I think Nigel Farage really hasn't helped himself recently with a number of things. Now, he's always had issues. He's had issues in terms of the people he surrounds himself with, how he does things, and this really kind of came to a head when recently Rupert Lowe did a somewhat misguided article in a newspaper, an interview, and stated that he wasn't sure if he would be at Nigel's side in the next election and that they need to move away from being a protest party. Basically kind of saying that Nigel Farage was a slightly messianic figure and he wasn't sure if he could devolve responsibility to others, and that he potentially wasn't sure that he was the guy. Now, a lot of people have thought Nigel Farage is the guy because he's talked a lot of sort of common sense, especially on things like immigration that a lot of people are worried about. But it seems like since Zia Youssef, or I'll call him by his full name, because if you don't know, his name is Mohammed Youssef. He is a Muslim. Ever since this guy's been chosen as chairman, things seem to have been watered down. This Zia Youssef character seems to be a very big donor and has kind of bought himself into this Reform Party. This is really interesting. And since that time, a lot of people seem to believe that Farage has watered down his opinions. There was an interesting interview that he did on the Winston Marshall podcast. He's the guy that used to be in Mumford & Sons. I believe he was the banjo player. And he's gone into the podcasting space. He's got some interesting opinions. And the discussion veered onto immigration, and it seemed like Farage was watering down his position in terms of the Islamic question, especially to do with the fact that a lot of people in this country have real issues with the Islamification of a lot of different areas. And he seemed to kind of row back a little bit on what he'd been saying and kind of shrugged and was like, well, you know, they're here now. And it sort of was like, well, are we supposed to just kind of accept that and kind of go on? And it seems like he's kind of shifting a bit to the centre, which is understandable. You know, if your party has got 5 MPs and you're polling at the numbers that he has, he wants to try and get as many people to support him as possible. He wants a broad spectrum of people. The problem with that is that more that you shift from a sort of right, sort of centre-right position more to the middle on certain issues, then you really are not going to bring the people that have very firm and strong opinions about those particular subjects in with you. It's just not going to happen. And so you're just going to alienate a lot of your voter base. Now, it's not just that. I think that he's always had issues. You know, in every party, that he's had anything to do with. And politics has become more now of a cult of personality. And I think he's dragged people through with the force of his personality. He's a good speaker, obviously. He's pretty knowledgeable. He's been around the political block for many, many years, being an MEP. He did a lot of good things. But his whole thing was Brexit. And now he's shifted his whole focus onto immigration. You don't really hear a lot of policy about anything else, which is a big criticism of Reform. I had a brief look through their manifesto on their website, and it could be better fleshed out for sure. Politics is an interesting game, and a lot of it is about personality, but you have to have substance, especially nowadays as people are getting more and more savvy about topics and the world and what goes on and how things work. So along comes this Rupert Lowe, and he kind of has come in, he's said a lot of the right things, and his opinions are a lot stronger than Nigel Farage's. On immigration, for example, his part of the interview he had, he was saying, this was the interview that got him into hot water, he was saying kind of round people up, put them on an island and let the midges do the work, for example. So his language is very strong, which isn't some people's kind of cup of tea at all. Now, what his kind of supporters do like is the fact that he is being very, very strong on this topic, whereas Nigel Farage has rown back on this topic. So then the question is which way do you go? Do you kind of go with the party leader, or do you kind of follow what the other person in the party is kind of saying? And the problem with Reform is with 5 MPs, it's very difficult because they've all got, as far as I can tell, pretty big personalities. The James guy, I'm not too sure about. I haven't really heard a lot about him. I don't really know a lot about him apart from he was convicted of, was it assault, I believe? Correct me in the comments if that is incorrect. But obviously then you've got Richard Tice, who's always on TV all of the time, literally on any of the GB News or Talk TV channels. He pops up on the mainstream ones as well. Obviously Farage covers all of those. You've got Lee Anderson, 30p Lee, as a lot of people like to refer to him as. Him coming from a mainstream party, he does the rounds on media as well. So you've got some fairly well-known people, even the chairman's popping up in a few different places now, mainstream media and the like. But it's like a question of where do they go from here? Obviously, they've had this huge falling out, and it's been played out in public, and there's rights and wrongs on both sides for sure. It's interesting, where does it leave the people, the base of Reform? I'm seeing a lot of people online kind of saying, well, Nigel's the person that put us here. We can't kind of leave now. We need to just push through because it's the only viable alternative to Labour or Conservative. Then you've got a hell of a lot of other people saying, well, actually, Rupert Lowe is stronger. His opinions are much more what I want to hear. I'm with him. So there is a huge divide, and I think that it's going to be very interesting to see where they go from there, particularly as the stuff that's playing out at the moment in the media with the split between them and the fact that he's had the whip removed, and it seems, for all intents and purposes, he's been kicked out of the party. So yeah, who knows? Who knows where this is going to go? And yeah, we'll see what happens.